ladies and gentlemen, now hosting the RizzoCast, put your hands together for Steven Risotto!
What's going on, everybody, and welcome. My name is Steven Risotto. I used to cover the San Francisco Giants for SFBay for 4 seasons, and I'm currently now a producer for 95.7 The Game in San Francisco. And I'm also the host of RizzoCast, a podcast that features current and former big league players, coaches, fans, media, and others who are regarded as some of the brightest minds around the game of baseball. And also journalism. We're going to shift gears today. Today's guest is Jesse Garnier, the fantastic journalism department chair at San Francisco State University and the founder of SFBay Media. Jesse was the one who took a chance on a 19-year-old Steven Risotto back in 2021 and threw him into the press box with zero professional experience covering sports. He gave me the opportunity to fulfill a lifelong dream for parts of 4 years, and I'm forever in debt. I later came across him at San Francisco State University, where I saw his passion for journalism and students, for that matter, on display every single day. Jesse and I discuss all things journalism in this episode, his early interest in the industry, the news scene in San Francisco, the changing industry, covering 9/11 in New York. He's got a great story there. The origin story of SFBay, covering sports, working with student reporters, so much more. This is episode 175 of RizzoCast, and let's get started. All right, and we are back on RizzoCast with Jesse Garnier, and Jesse is nice enough to take some time out of his busy day, his busy job, his busy week. Jesse, thanks for joining the show. How are you?
Thank you, Steven. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
And before we start, I just want to mention, so I wrote, obviously, did Giants for SFBay for a few seasons, and it was an incredible opportunity, and I owe a lot to the listeners out there. I owe a lot to Jesse for giving me this opportunity, for giving me that chance to cover baseball. Was I ready for it? Probably not, but I got a chance to get my feet wet in the industry, meet a bunch of cool people, get some reps in, and I cannot thank this guy enough. So Jesse, what you did for me is definitely beyond words. And I definitely really appreciate your help and support, not just at SFBay, but also San Francisco State too. In my 2 years there, you were a huge help, and I know that other people could probably echo that. So I want to thank you. Thanks for coming on, and I appreciate everything.
Well, you're welcome, Steven. It really was a pleasure and a true joy of my life. I mean, crossing over as in between a journalism professional, a journalism educator, and also just, I mean, you mentioned the things that I did for you. I really just gave you and others an opportunity to do what you could do. And that's one of the most valuable things I think that we can have as we're getting started, is that opportunity to demonstrate, to showcase, to be humble, to learn, and to put ourselves into situations for growth and advancement, and to get the attention of others around you, which congratulations, you certainly have done. And I'm very proud of you and your trajectory, and can't wait to see what the future holds.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny because we are recording this the day before Thanksgiving. So it is a big week. I know San Francisco State has off. First and foremost, what are your Turkey Day plans? And what's that day looking like for you?
Thank you, Stephen. Well, Thanksgiving, giving thanks is really about family and those closest to us, and very thankful and grateful for the family that we have in our lives, for those we're able to share those moments with, and for those that we no longer have, that we can bring into our spaces and our tables by raising a glass or setting a plate, or really honoring those memories and legacies. So I hope your Thanksgiving is full of joy and full of great food, and we'll make it the best that we possibly can.
Of course, and raising a glass or two or three or four or five, and yeah, that's a different.
Well, what we fill it with is up to you, but
yeah. What is that? Water. It's water.
Yes, exactly.
And this is, before we get into a bunch of the good stuff here, because I always have this debate with people, is there a correct time to start celebrating Christmas? Because, like, obviously nobody wants to walk into Target in the middle of July and you see the Christmas trees and the Christmas blow ups and everything. Is it right after Halloween? Do you have to wait until after Thanksgiving? Like, if you were running like some of these businesses, which I mean that's a big job, and I don't know if you would want that. When would you put the Christmas decorations out? When is the right time?
Thanks, Stephen. Great question. I say right about the time NFL training camps open. So I'd say that is now the new official start of the Christmas season. And you know this, there are houses in your neighborhood that leave them up all year. So I think that's really what we're moving towards. We're moving towards a 24-hour world and a 365 days of Christmas future.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. I agree. And sometimes, I go back and forth and, to each their own, I guess. Um, so you are the founder of SFBay.ca and the current department chair for the journalism program at SF State. We'll get into all of that in just a bit, but I do want to ask, how did you get into journalism? What was it about the industry that kind of initially sparked your interest to get involved in when you were younger?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I'll give you a direct answer. I really have no idea because I was 6 when it first happened, and probably even before that. I mean, that at 6 years old, kind of the creation story of my journalism journey is that when I was 6, my brother was 4, 2 years younger than I was. We were outside of our house out on Fifth Avenue near UCSF at the time, and we were riding around on our bikes and heard a screech and looked over, and my brother had been hit by a car on his bicycle, and he was fine and it was minor, but it was a traumatic event in our lives and the biggest news that had ever happened in our family. And I had already been uh, reading news in the newspaper. My parents, for better or for worse, for better, got me started reading and learning very early. And by 6, I was not only reading the news, but I was making the news. And after my brother got hit by the car, I put out a extra edition of San Francisco newspaper, and on the front it had a banner headline, scream across the top, "Boy hit by car on bike." And it had a quote lead. My lead was, "It felt like I was going to die," said Jonah Garnier, my brother. And it also had weather at the bottom of the page. And you'll appreciate this, Stephen. On the back, it had sports, and it had the standings for the National League West. And I can't remember the standings. I remember it was very early in the season. And so we had all that news, weather, and sports there in edition number 1 at 6 years old. And that was I still have that piece of personal memorabilia. It's my parents preserved it. I now have it framed in my hallway at home and use it to really represent the beginning of a lifelong journey through a craft that is bigger than a profession. It's not just a job. It's something that, when done correctly, is extraordinarily difficult and contributes to not just our marketplace of ideas, but to this trajectory of journeys just like yours through journalism and towards a world made better by accurate, factual, trustable information. So,
Yeah, no, so you probably walk by that and think about that every time that you walk by that framed memorabilia in your home, and that's pretty funny that it felt like your brother was gonna die, quoted by you. First ever quote. How many more editions of what was it called, the San Francisco? How many more editions came out?
that's a really good question. I think I called it the Chronicle. I have to go back and I'll look at it, and maybe I'll send you a picture and you can use it as inspiration. But yeah, it was a one of one in that press run, but it really went on to set the marker for the rest of my journey through um, elementary school, high school. I was the first ever editor of the first ever student paper at Philip Burton High School in its second year of existence. We launched the Burtonian, and I was the first ever editor, and we worked on original Macintosh computers using PageMaker to lay out software software to lay out our pages, and it was at that time, really in high school, that started to build not just my own sensibilities about the world and what I believe in and what I value, but also the value of building a team and working with others and working hard, having fun, being able to put those two together in the right proportion to execute ideas and accomplish the impossible. And I say the impossible because that is something that until you do something, it has not been done. And once you accomplish it, then you can move on to something and build from that. And this impossible aspect of journalism, in many ways, the end goal of journalism is impossible. It's an insatiable demand to represent our world fairly and accurately. Yet it is crucially important that we all take part in that journey, and to be able to do so with a team around us. At starting out in high school, you're a Reardon kid here in the city. I'm a Burton kid. We have this great public school, parochial school divide here among us, but of course, we're all brought together by this great city. Those kind of sparks that begin our journeys, that take us to places like I am now at San Francisco State, help to define our communities, but help to define our roles within them. And it's nothing is makes me prouder to be able to represent our craft and also illuminate that pathway for a fresh generation, just like you and those that are coming behind you.
Hmm. And you said something really interesting right there that I want to follow up on. You said this city kind of brings us together. And um I went to Reardon, of course, and it's funny because I get a lot of you are still very prideful about Reardon. Like I get defensive about Reardon. Like you could get me going about Reardon and I won't stop. But I was born in San Francisco, but I lived and was raised in Pacifica and just went to high school in San Francisco, went to college in San Francisco, whatever. But you are San Francisco through and through. And one of the perks of being in a major city is that there's never really a shortage of stories that come through the news cycle, right? And how would you describe the news scene here in the Bay Area in general and in San Francisco specifically, and kind of how you've seen this market change over time? Because it is a changing landscape. There's probably publications that are no longer here, publications that are no longer relevant, publications that might have come up a little bit over the past few years. How has the news cycle and the market here in San Francisco changed?
Yeah, thank you. So when you're a journalist of a certain age, you have a certain number of places and stops along your resume that just no longer exist. They no longer exist in a physical form. Maybe the nameplate doesn't exist any longer. Yet the legacy of those entities and enterprises moving forward is vast and difficult to measure. And I'll give you a couple examples from my own personal journey. My first professional post-internship newspaper job in my career was with the San Francisco Examiner in 1998. I was hired out of school as the Golden Gator editor at the time to create a brand new website for the San Francisco Examiner, the Hearst-owned San Francisco Examiner. And being a lifelong San Franciscan, being a consumer of news since six or before, the legacy of the San Francisco publications, including the San Francisco Examiner, was one of the things that energized me and attracted me. And I'll just be blunt and direct. I was always more of an Examiner guy than a Chronicle guy. The Chronicle was the stodgy paper that works in the interests of Nob Hill and Russian Hill and Pacific Heights and all the residents of San Francisco, frankly, that I am not a part of. I grew up in the Mission. I grew up on in public school, on food stamps, on welfare. Our family needed the support structure that San Francisco provided. And the San Francisco Examiner, the afternoon San Francisco Examiner of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was a scrappy afternoon paper staffed by geniuses, misfits, hotheads, a newsroom full of principle, uh, fighting for every story, always with a chip on its shoulder and a tip in its back pocket to turn readers into more informed citizens, and to do so in a way that entertained, that showed the creativity of writing as a craft, of visual journalism at the very highest of levels. My colleague now, Kim Kamenich, a Pulitzer Prize winner from the 80s, was part of a photo staff that is absolutely legendary. And I was able to walk into a newsroom as a returning student. So my educational journey is a little bit complex. Dropped out of school 3 times, took me 22 years to get my undergraduate degree. But one of those times that I dropped out was when the time I got hired by the San Francisco Examiner. And my first day in the newsroom on a Saturday, ostensibly hired to run the website and create digital content pretty early in that cycle, by the way. I was sent out on a story, and I was sent out on a Metro cover story to cover an event. Many San Franciscans are familiar with the Antiquarian Book Fair in the South of Market area. And I was given 4 hours to write 23 inches and coordinate with a photographer and create essentially Metro cover, inside front cover story. And of course, that's terrifying. And that's one of the things that journalism does, is it puts you in a position to perform and to demonstrate, not just to yourself, but to your editors and to others, what you understand about a world that's larger than you. And one of the beautiful things about starting out my San Francisco professional journalism career with that story, with something, I mean, the Antiquarian Book Fair, it's not going to move anyone's needle, but it has a legacy and it is an institution. And I guarantee you, if I screw that up or get things wrong or make assumptions or characterize that in ways that just are not accurate, you hear about it. And you hear about it as one of the beautiful things about journalism, as you know, is it's not the end of the conversation, it's the beginning of a conversation. And we want that conversation to be, yeah, you got that right. Here's some more things that you can look at, as opposed to, you're a total idiot and you don't get this at all. And how dare you impose your worldview on our beloved annual book fair. And the TLDR, the story went great. It went fine. I got one of the biggest compliments I've ever had in my journalism career walking out of a newsroom that day from my managing editor, Sharon Rosenhaus, who told me, "Nice lead. You can get awards, you can have impact, you can move issues in our communities, but when someone like Sharon, who was a journalism mentor, expresses herself in a way that, to her, she's probably said that, 10,000 times, or maybe not. But to me, it was one of those things that not only fueled my own drive, but also gave me some credibility within that newsroom and that news space, that you're not just the web guy, you're not just copying and pasting stories and shoveling things into some digital bucket. You can do this. And that was a beautiful thing about the Examiner. I was sent out on stories. I did have the opportunity to cover breaking news, feature news, never any sports news, unfortunately. That came a little bit later. But those opportunities to learn within an institution that meant so much to me and to so many San Franciscans, and then to be able to be a part of that team until the Examiner folded in 2000. Well, I'm sorry, it did not fold. The Examiner was sold to the Fang family when the Chronicle purchased. The Hearst purchased the Chronicle, and everybody jumped on that lifeboat, and that's kind of where things are today. So the landscape of San Francisco journalism has changed from a competitive, multi-daily newspaper and TV, really, um, to where it is now, which is a much more diverse set of digital publishers, small and large, nonprofit, for profit, um, some with bright futures, some with short fuses on as far as venture capital or private equity. Money drives this world and money drives journalism, and there isn't the kind of money in journalism that there once was. And we find ourselves, people in your situation, with a much different landscape for job opportunities and opportunities to have an impact coming out of college.
Mhm. Of course. And I know I mostly do little baseball interviews on here, but I mix in journalism when I can, and I hope a lot of people listening to this are hoping to get into journalism because we need as many people into journalism, and not just into journalism, but passionate about journalism. And we'll get into that in just a sec. But you mentioned the Examiner and kind of what you did there, and I know you also did some web services stuff for AP in the early 2000s, and that was kind of in the midst of like maybe the beginning of that type of change in journalism where things are starting to go online, newspapers are starting to kind of launch their websites, their form of web news. What do you remember from that time? Because I'm sure it's like it's brand new for a lot of people. I'm sure they hired someone young, and they weren't really sure what direction they wanted to be in, so they kind of let you take the wheel and lead that. What was, I mean, because there really wasn't a lot of blueprints, I'm sure, on how to do something like that.
No, there were not. And I will tell you, in 1993, the first time I saw a JPEG up against some text in Netscape Navigator 0.8, I think it was, I knew this is going to be where we all are. And I was working in the nonprofit housing finance industry at the time, the first time I dropped out of school. And uh, I mean, I took a hard right turn. I taught myself HTML, taught myself all the principles of the emergent world of web publishing, uh, and put a pathway to come back to school actually, and pick up my journalism education again. And you're absolutely right. There really was no blueprint, and I love the way that technology emerges and is utilized in across the multiple recent generations is that it is our young people that lead the way in the creative conversation, in the realm of defining what is possible, because no one really knew when I started working and designing the web in 93, 95. I've got websites. I'm a web consultant, starting to work as a web consultant for the county of San Mateo, other clients. This was a very early time in the web, and no one really knew what they wanted. I would come in and have meetings with people, and the ball would entirely be in our court. When I got my job with the Examiner, my first interview with Tim Porter, the deputy managing editor, I brought a fully designed prototype of their website, and this is what I showed them. This is what you should do in our very first interview. And that's a little bit forward to walk into a meeting with a fully formed idea of what this behemoth corporate entity should do. But I think it's fair to say they really did not have an idea. They knew that at the time, SFGate is still the behemoth web property in the Bay Area and the world practically. And they actually were at that time, and they were at the time a conglomerate of the Examiner, the Chronicle, KRON TV at the time, all fed into that. And the Hearst leadership were not happy with the way their content was being featured. They felt it was really subservient to the Chronicle. So they bought examiner.com, the domain, and started to publish a news site out of a newsroom. And at one point, before I got there, it was just managing editor Tim Porter putting it together, copying and pasting, building into a template. And when I got there, it was really, well, let's remember that template that you did. Well, uh, we're not going to do that. That was actually one of the most important lessons that I learned, is that the template that I designed never went anywhere. But what it did do is it showed me that I can do it. It showed them that I can do it. And then we threw it in the garbage can, and we started from scratch. And when we're writing, when we're creating, when we're building, I think it's really important for us to not get too enamored with our own work that we can't see a need to have a fresh start and have a fresh perspective. And it was a total blank slate. We did 2 iterations when we were there. The examiner.com at the time was, and I don't want to break my arm patting myself on the back going back 25, 30 years in time, but examiner.com was absolutely on the cutting edge of digital journalism at the newspaper level. We had a 24-hour breaking news operation. We had special sections that we put out for larger stories. We created immersive environments, immersive storytelling environments for special projects. We did audio slideshows from the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles in the year 2000, doing phone interviews, streaming them using what we called Real Player at the time, which was the very first vestigial sort of streaming structure that the web had. We wanted to help define what things could look like in a digital environment for journalism, and having it be not just the same page every single day that you go to that never changes, that you scroll through, same site, different content, different day, which is unfortunately where we've ended up at. We've ended up in a world where the presentation level of journalism has been entirely commoditized and reduced. I firmly believe that as storytellers, our most powerful gift is getting someone to feel something, to feel our story, to react, and to have that emotional investment, to take on, to ask someone to express and to have an emotional connection to our work. I don't think I am very troubled by our modern web of having 3 lines of text under 6 different popovers and floating ads that not just obstruct and distract, but remind us that we're there to be shown the ads, not to be shown the stories. And those early days of the Examiner, when we had no ad hole, we were creating an editorial experience and doing so with tools that were essentially a joke. This is HTML in the most early of days. This is before we had style sheets. We were doing everything in line, and I won't bore you or your audience with all the technical details, but there were multiple times a week we would get emails from all around the web asking, from web developers saying, okay, I give up. How did you do that? How did you make that happen? We did things like liquid designs that filled the page no matter how big your screen was. Today we call them responsive designs, and they're de rigueur. Everyone uses that and has for 15 years. Well, that did not exist at that time. And the being able to be creative in that moment, while also conveying some of the biggest stories of our day. One of the final stories that we worked on at the Hearst-owned Examiner that we presented on an ongoing basis as web publishers was the presidential election of 2000. And I'm old enough to remember. I'm not sure you are, but I'm old enough to remember that was the first major contested, down to the wire, didn't get determined on election day election, and it's had a significant impact on our country and on our future. And this is the stories we never stop working on the same story sometime in journalism. And to be able to leave that era and then move on, in my case, to the Chronicle and to SF Gate, and then on to the AP, was just part of a journey and a trajectory that I still value deeply.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the changes they're happening in journalism, and I think the one that I've noticed, aside from the obvious ones, right? I think the obvious ones are multimedia, kind of taking a bigger presence, and social media taking an even bigger presence in how stories are marketed and promoted, and even just, access to journalism. People could just take out their phones and boom, they're a journalist, and it's very interesting. Um, and I guess it's cool to an extent, and it's an alarming to an extent, however you want to characterize that. But I think another one is like that I notice is the regurgitation of stories, and I'll click on an article. I'm like, oh, this looks interesting, and it's like, oh, it's an article about another article. And I am guilty of I did some stuff at this giant Sports Illustrated site, and like we did a lot of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it was like, God, this is like, I can't imagine being the writer who is having an article written about their article. Like, sure, we're linking it, but I don't know, it's just kind of interesting. But what changes have you seen, kind of like that one, or like multimedia and social media, that are really making an impact in the journalism world, that are, pretty significant, I guess, evolution, pretty significant part of the journalism evolution, I should say.
Yeah, well, you bring up aggregation,
Aggregation,
and
yeah, it's a
that
regurgitation. Yeah.
well, and oftentimes it is, and
Yeah.
oftentimes the I was going to use another word, and that's amplification. And I think the best aggregation and the best aggregation models actually does amplify a story and extend it into new spaces or potentially new spaces, not try to take the place of the original. And I think that we're in a mode now where this aggregation or amplification, if you will, and I'll use it with a little more negative context, in the world of AI, where disinformation and misinformation can be magnified and given apparent credibility due to an ubiquity of incoming links and all these stories that look the same. So it must be true if these 20 sources are saying it. Well, none of the 20 sources are real. The original story wasn't real to begin with. And those are all things that can now be done at the push of a button and the execution of a prompt. And I'd say the three biggest things that I've seen in my career in journalism, first has been the digitalization of the craft, the fact that we are all now carrying small computers, sometimes multiple of them, in our pockets and on our bodies. If you have a watch, if you have a ring, if you've got a phone, if you're sitting in front of a laptop. I mean, I right now here at my office, I'm just casually looking around. I see 7 screens, and switching away from a model where everything is tangible and everything is printed. I like to say in journalism, we're not here to create litter. We're here to create awareness and build those knowledge underpinnings. There's a difference between journalism and information, and we can provide information, accurate information, and also extend that into what I would call true journalism. Journalism implies not only validated information, it also implies a process that scrutinizes that information at multiple levels. So when you learn something and tweet it out, if it's an injury update for the Giants that Matt Chisholm or somebody else came up to you and told you, or there's read it in the game notes. We authenticate that, we verify it, we show where that came from, and we put it out there. The sixth person down the road that's aggregating that has no idea what our process was to get there, but there is an inherent trust at where that information originates. And for journalism is not just about information, it's about that epistemological journey. How did we get this information? Where did it come from? How should I believe that it's true? And in the best newsrooms, every step of the journalistic process is scrutinizing your story from a perspective of disbelief. You cannot go around in this world telling ourselves how great we are and how wonderful our stories are. We need to find ways to assail our work, because that's what the public is going to do. And that journalistic process is what we teach here at San Francisco State. It's what journalism institutions like newspapers, like websites, like cable channels, like NBC Sports Bay Area add to that mix. They add that layer of journalistic process that, yes, plants that seed that can be aggregated and can be amplified. But it's got to come from somewhere. All of our stories, all of our, we don't make shit up in journalism. It's not the way that it works. We learn things, we verify things, and we publish things if they're important for our audience to know. And that also is a decision. In this era, the other biggest change that we're seeing, especially now, is what you mentioned, that everybody is a producer of information. I was going to say journalist, but I think that they're one of the beautiful things about America, and there are many beautiful things about America, is that you don't need a license or a certificate to perform journalism. There is no certification process. It is a craft. It is an act. It is not something that you have to be qualified to do. And to have that, to have that right and that ability to do that does not necessarily mean that you can go out and be good at it. And the journalistic process that we apply through our institutions is different from learning and sharing things as an individual. And that is something, that certainly can be journalism, and it can be, could be meaningful contributions to this marketplace of information and ideas. But it is also, all of our information, the more important things get, the more things need to be scrutinized and validated. And we've had I've had fascinating conversations with academics and with students and other people about influencers and this single person kind of personality driven mode of delivering information. Are influencers journalists? Is that mode journalism? And I'll give an unsatisfying answer, which is it depends, and it certainly can be, but it is not by definition. And journalism is something that is crucial, not just for what the end result is, but in how we get to that result. And I think I worry about losing touch of that in a world so cluttered with misinformation that people, quite honestly, have lost the ability to tell the difference in a lot of ways. And that's a failing of journalism. It's a failing of education. It's a failing of our own sense of rigor towards what we believe. But it's also means there's work to do. And that's why our doors are still open here at San Francisco State. We're working to keep them that way. And we're working to help build that next generation of journalists at a time when they have never been needed more than this very day and this very moment.
Mhm. Yeah, no, we'll definitely get to that. And I do want to bring up, and by the way, I think my mom could be technically categorized as a journalist because when there's an earthquake or when the power goes off, she is immediately on Facebook telling all of her friends, earthquake or the power went off in Pacifica. So she is kind of reporting. So I don't know where she gets that from. No. So I do want to bring up the one of the stories that you tell through the halls of the humanities building in San Francisco State University is the experience you had in September 2001. And you had the opportunity, and I guess unfortunate opportunity, but an opportunity nonetheless to cover the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And I know you have quite the story from that instance.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. That so you mentioned MNN, the Mom News Network, with the earthquakes, and a very powerful source of news, highly credible, um,
Yeah.
especially your mom. But the that 1989 earthquake, having experienced that and lived through that here in San Francisco, and then as a what I would call kind of a pre-journalist, I was actually in college at the time, and that was my first time as an undergraduate, and did a little bit of kind of amateur coverage of that, I would say. But 12 years later, living in New York in 2001, working with the Associated Press, I had started at the AP in March of 2001 and spent that summer getting trained, learning the institution, uh, developing relationships, understanding the workings of one of the most important news organizations in the world, with an organization with tremendous legacy, tremendously high standards, but just a reach and an ability to do journalism that is extraordinarily powerful. When you call anyone and you're Jesse Garnier with the Associated Press, those calls get returned and people talk to you and tell you things, and it's a tremendous responsibility. I started the AP in March 2001. I was hired by the graphics department. I was actually hired as a web services creative director. Nobody knew what that meant either at the time, but I was there to do for the AP what I did at the Examiner, which is create websites both internally and externally that were innovative and interesting and represent fresh ideas and thinking. And that was like my day job. My night job there grew into actually working in the graphics department. Within a few months of me getting there were some staffing changes, and I found myself within a couple of months working in a role of art director, which is like a managing editor of the graphics department. It was about a 25-person team at the time, and we were responsible for doing graphics, charts, diagrams, illustrations for the biggest stories of the day. And as art director, you oversee that team and make news decisions. And I spent couple months sort of getting used to that role, kind of working off and on alongside my web stuff. But then in September, before 9/11, my boss came to me and told me, "Yeah, he said, I'm going to take next Tuesday off. I'm thinking, do you want to, run the department and go to the meetings and handle all the editorial stuff?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. This is great. I'm excited. I'm 30 years old, young, uh, blonde dyed hair, California kid, freshly arrived from San Francisco. um Heck yeah, let's do this." So I wake up pretty early that morning, getting ready to head to work, head to the office to oversee things for the first time, and I'm in my hallway listening to the radio, and here on crackling across a radio station in New York called 1010 Winds, which is kind of like the 24-hour news channel of New York City, or at least it was at the time. That Well, it sounds like we think maybe a small plane may have hit the World Trade Center, and your very, very first early live unconfirmed reports. And I'm like, oh man, I got to get ready. So I'm obviously this is a big, anything hits any building in any city, that's a huge story. And little did I know that in the minutes and hours that ensued, it not only became the biggest story in New York, it became the biggest story in world history, arguably, especially one being covered by the lens of modern journalism in that way. So I will abridge this story because it is a very long story, and this is one that I think the maybe kind of getting to the lessons of this, but when I stepped into that newsroom at the AP, I realized that as a news leader, your role, your responsibility is not just to get things right. It is also to be able to get things right. And that means creating, leading your team, setting goals and priorities, building trust with those around you, and being able to execute when the moment is absolutely uncompromising. There is no margin for error in those spaces. And of course, in journalism, uh, we do get things wrong. As the first draft of history, we're going to be working in a moment of uncertainty. And in a lot of ways, that day was, I mean, we were in the center of New York, which is the media capital of the world. Our building was evacuated. We were told by federal authorities that 30 Rockefeller Center was believed to be on a list of targets that were uh, 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 thought to be next. And the entire building was evacuated. The Associated Press and other media outlets in those buildings stayed behind. And we spent that day um, telling the story of what was unfolding before our very eyes. As I walked to work, I saw the towers on fire, spewing thick black smoke, staring down Lexington Avenue towards Lower Manhattan. And not being a structural engineer, the first thing that I saw when I looked at those buildings is those things are going to fall. And it was a matter of time. It was a race against time to get to work, to start telling those stories, to start putting the facts together, and then to start analyzing what actually just had happened, because there's a chaos of emergency, especially when you're right in that environment, that news organizations have to be able to transcend. So this flow of information that started coming into us, photos, videos, most of these were kind of backhauled or uplinked through satellite. At that time, there was digital video. It was very poor. We had, of course, the AP, the strongest visual photo wire in the world, feeding us. And we had to determine exactly what had happened. Our job in the graphics department, by the way, was to turn out graphics and descriptions of the planes and the buildings and the companies and every aspect of detail surrounding that. So there was a lot of like just information verification. But then it was determining, our big job was to put out a, a, a centerpiece graphic showing those planes hitting the buildings and being accurate about what we represented visually. Was very difficult. It was there were the first of all, all the video and all the photos were extraordinarily difficult to watch and consume. Oftentimes in journalism, we are put in position of needing to do things, to do our jobs that are that can leave a mark and leave a mark on us for a long time. And my at the AP, journalists put themselves in harm's way and are killed, and journalists that fall around the world journalists that fall in places like Gaza need to be remembered and need to be honored. And here I was, sitting as an editor in a newsroom looking through images, and also in an environment where, you could start to, I mean, there was a dustiness, there was literally, uh, uh, a smell within the air within New York in those ensuing days and weeks, and not there was it hung over us even in those moments to be able to do our jobs. But you do it, and you look at every single thing that is out there, and you spend your day arguing with your team about what they see and what you see. And we there were people that there many people had to leave the AP. They said, I cannot stay at work. I need to go home. My family needs me. I don't know where someone is. And I told them, said, well, this is a 30-year employee of the AP. I says, if you gotta, if you go, if you gotta go, you go. If you stay, we need you. And we also had people heroically get into Lower Manhattan or Midtown to do work and to cover this. And we're essential pieces, including my boss, Scott Johnson, who came down from Connecticut and ended up in a cop car coming through Harlem and getting to work, showing up at like 3 in the afternoon. It's like, okay, let's get to work.
The one that you were supposed to take over for that day.
The one I was supposed to take
Okay.
over for that day. So Scott didn't get a day off after all. And in those environments and people like Scott, who represent some of the most dedicated and gifted journalists that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, you find a way to tell that story. And we're not, journalists are not in a position or at the esteem of first responders and the contributions they make to lives and to our world, but as second responders, as that wave of being able to let other people know what had happened. And that's what that at the core of our job is: accuracy and truth, and being able to do that in those breaking news conditions. I will say that at the end of the night, we put out a big graphic, our centerpiece front page graphic to run on newspapers across the country and around the world, that showed the planes, hitting the World Trade Center and hitting the floors, and being able to represent which floors and which faces were hit by the planes. Um, as soon as we transmitted that graphic out to all of our members, and it was a satellite-based system, so there wasn't much latency. Literally, the second that we pushed the button on that, we started getting calls from member newspapers saying that we got things wrong, and we the faces are wrong, the floors are wrong. You've got this, you got that, and first of all, we had spent all day, probably 8 to 10 hours at that point, again, looking at every image, going through everything that we had, literally reconstructing that there in the middle of the newsroom. And the one thing you never want to do in journalism is get something wrong and be wrong in those moments based on the information that you had. So we went back and we looked at it. We looked at everything again, and we went through it top to bottom. And it took us about another 45 minutes of us all coming together. And on that time, in that moment, we stood by our graphic and stood by our story. And to this day, it represents accurate historical representation of where those planes hit those buildings and the faces that they hit. And it's not all about just getting things right that won't matter, but it really is. And it really, if we're gonna go there, we've got to go there with all we've got, whether or not it's a Giants gamer or a front page infographic on the biggest terrorist attack ever to be witnessed in modern history. So, we have to hold ourselves to those standards. And that's also what it taught me, is that you need to do your best job and you need to stand behind your work, but you always need to be able to go back and scrutinize it again. It's how we learn, it's how we grow, and it's what we'll keep doing.
Yeah, no, very powerful story for sure. And I've always been very interested in the media coverage from that day, and always hearing about how Howard Stern just went longer, like his show went longer, and that was like a very different Howard Stern than he is today. And somehow he's become a halfway decent interviewer, and that's a topic for a different day. But that and so much that had happened that day, and it's really interesting to get your perspective. And I do want to switch gears before we wrap to SFBay and SF State. We'll start with SFBay real quick. You are the editor and founder. How did the idea of starting SFBay develop, and what have you kind of learned from the experience running it?
Wow, thanks. That's a lot. I'll do my best. Um, Starting SF Bay was my return to journalism after earning my undergraduate degree. It took me 22 years to get my undergraduate degree. It didn't take you that
Congratulations.
long, Stephen. Congratulations, you too. Um,
Thank you.
and all of our journeys are different, and we support all journeys here at San Francisco State. In a lot of ways, I'm like walking proof of that. After I completed my journalism degree in 2010, I entered a very uncertain job market. I was now 40 years old. I was at a different stage of my career. I had the degree that I did not have previously, but to be to be brief, the job market was awful, and it was coming out of a fiscal, a financial meltdown in Wall Street that really trickled into all areas. And I got very lucky to get a job at Stanford as a senior web developer, working in the bioengineering department, working with people way smarter than me, doing things that I didn't understand, but I was running the website, and it was great exposure. It taught me a lot about the world. It also taught me you want to be back in journalism. And because you can't spend any time at Stanford without conceiving of a startup idea, it's just the way that it works. That's exactly what I did, and dreamt up an idea of a local, regional news outlet that served the entire Bay Area with, at the time, it was news and sports and entertainment and a calendar. Actually, one of the big things that we launched was to unify an entertainment calendar under one heading. Um, and SFBay really started as something you mentioned earlier, kind of an aggregation and amplification play. There's at the time, and still is, a layer of publications like that that add their value through their personality, through maybe some humor, maybe the way that they bring things together. And we at SFBay thought, well, maybe there's room in that space, and maybe there's room in that space to be able to add some value to uh, to coverage that exists in the ecosystem. And we did that for about a year. And two things happened. One, we got pushback within the community that didn't appreciate that kind of aggregation, that looked at it as being a cheap way to uh, steal traffic from the original publishers. And that is one way to look at it. I don't look at it that way. We did things to make sure it wasn't that way, like always link to the story and, in a very prominent way, and give credit to original reporting, and do the kinds of things that could amplify rather than just kind of interrupt that flow of traffic to the original publisher. But that got kind of boring. And it also got, to a point where we wanted to start doing our own original news and sports content. And we did. We started to cover all kinds of local events and stories. We had a staff of freelancers. We had a news editor, a sports editor. We started down that road, and part of starting down that road was um, sports coverage, and to cover local professional sports in a way that we hadn't seen, which was at that level that you're not a cable network, you're not a newspaper, you're a local digital source. And at the time, and many pro leagues still have this rule in a lot of ways. There, the rule was no digital outlets cover our teams. Period. Period. It was you cannot get credentialed if you are digital only. You will buy a ticket and you'll watch the game like the rest of everybody else because you're a blogger and
Times have changed.
well, and times did change, and I like to think, Stephen, that SFBay was a part of that changing. I know it's a name that not many people, it's not a household name at the tip of many tongues, but the first way, and of course we asked for credentials and asked to cover every pro team in the very beginning. Oh my God, so early to 2012, 2013. And we were turned down by everybody with that exact answer that we do not credential digital outlets. And one thing that you might know about me, Stephen, is I don't give up. And one of the first things that I always do after being told no is to ask them to reconsider. I did that, and they still said no. And then we decided, well, how do we get into this? How do we break this down? And there was a brand new minor league hockey team just forming in San Francisco at the time called the San Francisco Bulls, and they were awful, and they played at the Cow Palace, and they had no fans. They had a very solid fan base of about 75 people. There were but we decided, let's start there. So when they announced the team, we reached out to the team, asked for credentialed. They said yes. They started their first season. Their first game, by the way, was one of the most incredible social events in San Francisco sports history. The Cow Palace was sold out. They had free drinks. It was just the biggest part. I mean, this was one of the coolest things I have ever been to at the Cow Palace outside of the rodeo and Circus Vargas. But the second game, there were like 150 people there, and it got worse from there. And I'm exaggerating, conflating, but it was for minor league hockey kind of a non-event. The team wasn't very good. It was a low level, mid level of minor league hockey. But for SFBay, we were there covering pro sports every single night with words and photo. And we started to put a little bit of a following together. And the Bulls were also became a minor league affiliate of the Sharks. And when we were able to put a little Bulls coverage together, I packaged that up and I sent it to the San Jose Sharks. And I said, we'd like to cover the San Jose Sharks. We're covering your minor league affiliate in San Francisco. And they, of course, said no. And I, of course, asked them to reconsider. Eventually, they did let us go down there. And we were able to cover our first Sharks games from the SAP Center. It was late in the year. The team was terrible. But we got those first big 4 clips out of the end of that season. The next season comes along and we're like, well, we want to do the same thing. Now we want to try to cover the Giants. So, and this journey that ended up with your stay with us, Stephen, really started again with rejection, and persistence, and eventual success late in the season. Again, when the team is terrible, the Giants let us in, and they let us in to cover words only, press box, no photo, first time. And then it started to unfold that we got a couple more credentials. We got credentialed for photo, and then the next season we were on daily credentials, and we were getting game by game. And they wouldn't let us cover photo at all, and then they would, and then that turned into the A's, and then from there, we're kind of on a roll. And then once you're in those conversations, and have that legacy. Now it's no longer we don't credential digital outlets. We don't credential digital outlets other than these guys. And it was there was a time that continued to kind of build, until the Giants started, having success. We started covering the Warriors, the 49ers, the Raiders, um, the Warriors, the San Jose Earthquakes. I mean, there were nights in our SFBay newsroom where we were covering four games with four writers, three photographers in the press box filing photos. Um, and that was unique for a non-affiliated, non-corporation owned journalism outlet. That was a real accomplishment at the time. And it led to us being able to give you the opportunity that you had, and to give so many other sports writers and sports editors a place and an opportunity. And SFBay has former staff and alumnus all over sports journalism. Shayna Rubin, with the Chronicle, is former SFBay Giants beat writer for several years. She covered those one of the championship years. I mean, these were the times where Sarah Todd, beat writer for the Deseret News for the Utah Jazz, covered the Golden State Warriors for SFBay, was our first beat writer, broke our Mark Jackson story, which was one of our biggest stories. And there's more than that. There's names that people know and there's names that people don't know that are, throughout Bay Area sports journalism. And we're very proud of that. We're proud to be able to create and build that opportunity. And yeah, proud that there's been movement and obviously an awareness that we live in a digital reality and you don't need to be owned by a major news corporation owned in Midtown Manhattan to cover sports in San Francisco.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's a great origin story. And it's great that we could fit in a San Francisco Bulls reference at any given point. And I'm glad that we could, and I'm gonna try to fit it. I'm gonna go to work today and I'm gonna go, hey, does anybody know anything about the San Francisco Bulls? And see what the reaction is. And I will let you know about that. Before we kind of fold here like the Bulls did, and that is a segue. I'm learning what a segue is now. I'm a month
Well
into
done.
radio, and I know what a segue is. Before we fold, how did you get into teaching? And this is a very loaded question yourself, and I want to know, like, student journalism has come a long way, and obviously I think the difference for me is I did journalism in high school, junior college, and a 4-year university. And in high school, it was maybe me and one other person out of a staff of maybe 65 people who wanted to go into journalism, make that a profession for themselves. And then in junior college, it kind of dwindled down a little bit. There were still people that were just part of the newspaper on the side and had another major. Getting to San Francisco State, it was all journalism people. And now, the commitment level, I'm sure, maybe varied, but do you think that students are more or less engaged in journalism now than they were, maybe even a few years ago? So I guess that's kind of a two-part question. How did you want to get involved in teaching? Why was that important for you? And also the engagement level right now that you see with student journalists.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I'll answer the first uh, part of that pretty quickly, although it's a long answer. I've always wanted to teach. If you know something and aren't willing to share it with someone else to make them better, what is the point of knowing that? This is a very core level. I believe we get better by being better collectively, and we should always be willing to share, always be willing to learn. So whether it's teaching somebody how to export a video in Premiere, or it is to teaching an understanding of where we fit into this world and what kind of roles can be played. Yeah, teaching is just natural, and it's innate. There's a lot more to teaching than being a professor at a university, and that is a whole nother conversation. But one of the best things about teaching, especially well at San Francisco State and the job that I have, um, is that engagement of students, Stephen, to talk about the level of dedication of our students. And you're right, it varies. There is it always has and always will. Everyone is an individual, and we're entitled to that space to operate, with that agency. But we also have the ramifications from that and our own personal consequences for everything that we do. Um, trying to trying to trying to shed light on that journey of each student without being prescriptive, with the sense of empathy and understanding of experience. All of our students, all of us have different journeys and backgrounds and beliefs, and that is something not just be respected, is something to be valued. And we try to create a space that welcomes everyone, and there's a safe exchange of ideas, a place where people can not only express themselves, but allow other people to express themselves. As journalists, we are professional listeners. This is our job. Our job is to listen and to understand. Now, what we listen to based on our questions and how we engage, that's our active role in that process. But to be able to synthesize information, um, this our students are, I mean, I'll take it from this angle. We have fewer journalism students than we had in the past. In a previous era, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, our journalism department was up around 400 students, 350, 400 students. As our university has shrank, and as other social factors like being called the enemy of the state by the President of the United States have reflected negatively upon journalists, our enrollment has dropped. And as of this semester, we're down to around 150 students seeking degrees in journalism, photojournalism, and bilingual Spanish journalism. But I've got an analogy. If you let me, the
Please.
analogy I use is it's like Tide Pods. So, Tide Pods, you drop the little thing in the washer, and you're no longer lugging home 10 gallons of liquid soap that is mostly water. And Tide Pods are highly concentrated. And that is what I've seen in this generation of journalism students. There's of course a continuum, like about all things, but there are students that are deeply passionate, deeply engaged, interested in working on their skills and working with others, in having an edge of cooperation along with competitiveness, where there's a real sort of, the as the pack gets faster, so do we, and being able to reach and excel. And you know I the there's also another concentration that's happened is, our audiences have gotten smaller as well, but those who follow are deeply engaged and really committed to a community. And when we see something, publication like Golden Gate Express that, has, important traffic numbers, modest in a major media market, there's always room for growth. But how it impacts a community, and that community on a college campus is not just students. It's students, it's faculty, it's administrators, it's families, it's neighbors, it's alumni, it's people hiring, and the those overlapping concentric circles, really rely upon college journalists to do their jobs. And if we can create a place where to allow you, the journalism student, to grow in the direction you want, to receive a framework and enough guidance to help you along the way, and then to open doors afterwards with alumni connections, relationships, opportunities based on networks, based on LinkedIn direct connections, all kinds of those ladder rungs that I think a program like SF State Journalism can and should and does do for our students while they're here and then after they're gone, just like you, Stephen.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great experience for me, and I would not have changed anything about it. It was a kind of the newsroom was kind of a second home for me. We tried our hardest at Golden Gate Express to make sure it's the best content and the best environment for journalists, because I put a big emphasis on getting as many people into journalism as possible, but also people, trying to make an impact in journalism. Because I think there's a distinct difference between quantity and quality. And, that I kind of have an affection for people that like the industry and love the industry. And that's part of the reason why I have you on. I think that you are one of the best advocates for journalism that I know. And this podcast, I know it's again mostly sports related, but I'm glad that I could mix in some journalism every now and then, sometimes split. Um, and I'm really glad that you could take some time and hop on the show, Jesse. I know I kept you forever, so sorry about that, but I'm glad that you could hop on.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate the opportunity and really love RizzoCast and all the work that you do, and can't wait to see what's next.
It's almost like one of those things that that weird feeling when you're listening to a radio show and then you call into the radio show and it's like the you're gonna be like hopping inside of your television set, Jesse, for this one. So I'm glad that
Oh,
you
can't
enjoy the
wait.
show. And
Thanks again.
yeah, of course. And everybody could listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you consume the vehicle of your choice. Go check us out. And then, of course, on Instagram and Twitter at RizzoCast, TikTok too. I do some stuff there now too. I feel like you have to. So go check all that out soon. And more to come. And see you next time.